I'm Charles Dowding in my wonderful garden at Homeacres, Somerset, UK, all created without any soil cultivation. It's a no-dig garden full of abundance now at this time of year, early autumn, and I want to show you good ways to harvest all these wonderful leaves, roots and fruits so that you can get the most from your plants and sometimes encourage the plants to keep producing. Here I'm amongst a selection of winter vegetables which have been growing here since May through all the summer, and most of them can stand here all winter. So it's like a winter larder outside, and I'm going to show you how you can harvest them through the winter at different stages to give you wonderful meals fresh from the garden. This is a kale which was sown 4 months ago. It's still quite small. It's a slow-growing perennial kale, in fact, so it should last for quite a few years. So it's just establishing, but you can pick a few leaves off it now. This one's called Dormantons, and here I'm harvesting, taking the outer leaves, the lower leaves off the bottom, always leaving. It's a central tenet of harvesting for future growth, that you leave the central smaller leaves and take the larger outer ones. So just a small harvest to start with there of kale. And then these red cabbage, they have a heart which is nicely developed now. You can see it feels pretty firm, and with a cabbage you're waiting until that heart feels solid to harvest it. If they're running out of time and it's coming into late autumn, then you've got to cut it at that point if hearts are more frost tender than leaves. Whereas Brussels sprouts have a wonderful ability to withstand all kind of winter weather, and you always, again, starting at the bottom of the plant, twisting off, pushing down buttons, and here they are. They often are slightly imperfect to look at, but they're beautiful flavour when they're fresh off the plant. Particularly good actually when they've had frost on them, because that does bring out the sweetness. Here are some multi-sown module grown leeks. So they were sown 3 seeds in a block, and I'm going to harvest one now. This is an autumn leek, in fact, which is ready. You can tell it's ready because it's sort of starting to die off a bit on the outside and still looking okay, but all of these leeks actually have got hammered by the caterpillars of leek moth, unfortunately, which happens here every late summer, and I just let them ride through it. And then the winter leeks here, they're gonna just sit there for a while, and then come October, autumn onwards, when the caterpillar pupates, these leeks will really grow vigorously to make winter harvests. Meanwhile, here we have an autumn harvest, and so I'm just cutting around the root a bit. These leeks are not planted deep, they're short shank in terms of the white part of the leek, but you've still got a decent length of stem. And I'm going to peel off the outer sheath to see what's in there a bit, and wow, it's looking not too bad. Sometimes the caterpillar can do a lot worse damage than that, so we've got a reasonably nice shank of leek. And then I'm just trimming off the outer leaves, and most of that is edible, so that's a worthwhile harvest. You can see also here the left behind are the 2 much smaller leeks. When you sow 3 seeds in a block, you get very variable sizes, and I mean, these could be harvested. I'll let them grow on a bit for now and then pick them a bit later. Here I've grown some winter squash amongst my 2-year-old apple trees, and they're all maturing at different times according to different varieties. First we have a futsu black, which is not yet ready to pick, leaves still green. Then a blue curry, which is getting there, leaves still a bit green. And here we have Crown Prince, which is my favourite variety for flavour. It's wonderful, and that's ready now. We can harvest today, and these ones have been ready for a couple of weeks already. This is red curry. They always mature quickly. They're very good squash to grow if you have a short summer season. There's an interesting sequel here to the squash harvest, where I have here some squash that we harvested 5 days ago. Each crate coming from just a 4 foot by 7 foot bed. Small area, gives you wonderful winter harvest, and they're all kabocha, in fact, but home safe seeds. So they're cross-pollinated with some red curry, and you can see that from the same squash plant there's all different colours and shapes and sizes, but really good winter squash. And then, having harvested the squash, I sowed mustard seed. So I drew out a drill in the soil, which is actually compost on top. This is undug soil with compost on top, and sowed mustard seed. And the mustard's coming up now, and that will make a green manure of great abundance through the autumn and then be killed by frost in the winter. Here on my right, I have some beans, which are another wonderful winter food. These are borlottis, and when they get dry, when the pods are dry, you can pick them, and I can hear tapping it, the rattling of the beans inside, so that means the beans are ready. And you'll see these are beautiful beans, already dry, 5 in this pod, 6 even, and they can just be finished drying on a tray in the house just to make sure they're really dry, and then be stored simply in a jar for use over winter as dry beans. And I can assure you these dry beans have a flavour unlike any you can buy. And here we have something which I like even more than the borlottis, which is runner beans, and this is a variety called Sa. And again, I'm waiting for the pod to dry. Here's a nice dry pod. The pod's gone yellow, and inside this pod you'll see the dry runner beans. It's a white seeded variety, and they both look and taste like butter beans. They are just so delicious. And again, likewise, dry them off a little bit inside, store them in a jar, eat them anytime you feel hungry in the winter and spring and onwards. Here I'm standing beside a more mature kale plant. This one is 3 years old. It's a perennial kale called Taunton, and I've been picking leaves from it for over 2 years now, and I'm just harvesting 1 or 2 here to show you. So it makes a very long stem, and I just keep picking leaves off the top of the plant like that. So that's a harvest, and they're multi-stem, so you want to get in there amongst the different stems. They need a bit of pruning as well, but you can see how you can end up with a really worthwhile harvest. This is what's grown just in the last 4 days in the autumn, for example. Here I'm doing a rare thing for a no-dig gardener, which is I've got my spade and I'm looking to loosen the ground where the parsnips are grown, because parsnips are brilliant winter vegetable. They can sit in the ground all winter and they go down into the undug soil. The difficult bit is getting them out again, because the ground is actually firm, but although it's firm, they've rooted into it very well. And usually when it's firm soil, they go in without forking or anything. This one really, it's finally coming. And so, yeah, look at this. So there we have a beautiful parsnip grown in undug heavy soil. This is clay under the loam on top, and these roots can be harvested at any time in winter because they happily freeze and get sweeter when they're cold. Here I'm removing these stones so that I can pull the net back. This is just simple black bird netting, which I use a lot because it's so easy to put on and then remove when you want to pick. And in this case, I've got it on to keep rabbits off these lettuce. It could also be against pigeons or deer sometimes. It's just a very useful anti-animal or bird netting. And you can see that underneath now we have access to a wonderful range of lettuce plants. What I do with the lettuce is I keep removing the outer leaves. I never take a knife to the plant as a whole, so I just twist off the outer leaves. It's a slight downward motion and a slight rotation to one side, and you end up with a leaf which is delicious. This plant has already given 3 harvests. This is the 4th harvest now on a weekly basis, and you've always got the choice of how hard you pick. That's probably enough. So this one's grown 4 leaves in a week. We're well into autumn now, so it's slowing down a bit. And this plant is Maravilla di Verano. It's an Italian variety, delicious, crunchy Batavian. Here now we have a gorgeous red lettuce called Bijou, and you can see the striking colour of these leaves, which are slightly bitter actually, because all red leaves tend to be more bitter than green ones. So I'm not growing too many of them, but they make a wonderful addition to the colour of your salad in the bowl, as well as looking lovely in the garden too. So that's Bijou. And then here we have a pale tawny oak leaf, which again, same principle, slight downward pressure, slight rotation. I'm getting all the stem off, and I want to get all the stem off. If you don't like to eat all that stem, you can simply break it off like that, and then you've just got leaf. But the reason I like to remove the stem from the plant is you end up then with a clean trunk, if you like, and as the lettuce grows upwards, that trunk becomes more pronounced. They get easier to pick as you go on, and that discourages slugs because you're keeping it clean all around the plant, no hiding places for slugs. And so already from those 3 plants, in a week's growth, we've got that many leaves. And these plants, the most amazing part is these plants go on producing for a long time. These were sown on the 10th of July, planted here 29th of July as 19-day old plants. So they were just small plug plants, and we started picking them 3 weeks ago. It's now mid-September, and they'll go on producing until the first major frost, which will be probably another 6 weeks. So they'll have had 9-10 weeks of harvests every week from the same sowing. I find a really useful tip when harvesting salad leaves is to remove all the debris, weeds included actually. So that way you end up with a lovely clean plant, which makes the ensuing harvest easier because you haven't got old decaying leaves in the way. And then also, likewise, removing weeds is a good idea while you're harvesting. So there's a little weed that I'm pulling out, and that keeps it all nice and bare around the surface of the plant. So there's nowhere, there's another weed, nowhere for slugs to hide. And it just keeps everything really ticking over nicely, and it keeps the plant concentrating on making new leaves. It doesn't have to worry about shedding its old leaves. This plant here is land cress, which is similar in flavour actually to watercress, but much more abundant. And so you can have that wonderful cress flavour in salads, not in the spring or summer, because this is a plant like all the others in this bed. If you sow them in spring or summer, they flower before they make many leaves. But sowing late summer, in this case mid-July, late July, planting early August, that's the flowering season's gone by, and so I can now pick off lots of lovely cress leaves. So this is only 5 weeks since I planted this plant. You can see it's grown large already from very tiny seeds. I'm not even going to pick it all actually at the moment because there's so many leaves on here, and that's a really strong flavour which is going to add a lot of oomph to the salad. And here we have wild rocket. Now this is, rocket really is a misnomer. The word rocket, English word rocket, is applied very loosely to 2 plants which are incredibly different. Salad rocket, which we saw just now, is not the same family of plants as this wild rocket. Wild rocket's a true perennial, and it does start to flower a bit, as you can see, flower buds there from this July sowing. And the way I'm picking it at the moment is taking out the whole flowering stem as they happen, and then taking the leaves off them. So that way I'm just discouraging, and you can also eat the flower buds, but I'm discouraging the flowering tendency. And then the plant will settle down and produce lots of salad leaves through the autumn, even into winter, and next spring and early summer. It goes on for a long time, much beyond what salad rocket will do. I find in summer, when I'm mostly growing lettuce in my salads, because they're the main seasonal plant at that time, the flavour's sometimes a bit lacking, so I love to grow basil to add a real great extra dimension to flavour, and this is sweet basil here, which I'm picking every few days. In fact, this plant I picked only 4 days ago, and the way I'm doing it is I'm picking new stems, the whole little new stem each time, because basil is a multi-stem plant that just keeps making new side shoots. And a great virtue of basil, when you pick it this way, look after your plants. You might need to thin out some of the stems occasionally, but they go on producing all summer. So these were sown in April in the greenhouse, planted here in early June, and this is now mid-September, so they've been cropping for 14 weeks, regular harvests, and they'll go on for another month. Here we're looking at vegetables grown through late spring, summer, early autumn, which are good to harvest from now until the frost in most cases, over the next 6 weeks. And there's a wonderful range of colours and flavours, which I'm showing you vegetable by vegetable, the different harvests you can take over the coming month or two. These two beds have a range of different varieties of chicories that were all sown at the same time on the 10th of July, planted here on the 30th of July, all at the same time, and yet they're maturing at different times according to which variety it is. And here we have some of the first ones to mature. This is a Palla Rossa, standard Palla Rossa. Palla Rossa means red heart, and the way you tell when they're ripe is not by how big they are, because they're very variable. They all come to a different size in the end. In fact, this one's probably got the firmest heart that I felt here, and it's one of the smallest plants, so don't always look for the biggest. You want to just feel the heart and feel that firmness, and then it's ready to harvest. And there are two ways of doing it. You can either just cut it off at soil level, or, in fact, what I'm going to do is twist it out, and the reason for that is because that will be enough. I've just got a bit of the root out. That discourages regrowth. They are biennial plants. If you'd like regrowth, in which case just cut them and leave the root in, you'll get some new little chicory leaves. And then after harvesting, you just want to trim off these outer leaves, or cut them off, whichever's easier. And usually I'll take off that one as the last one. And there we have a lovely little chicory heart. Just cut the root off, which is actually pretty heavy. That's over half a pound, that's probably about 200 grams. And that contains, you can just peel off leaves to eat in salad. This is red cabbage, a variety called Calibos, which has a heart which is actually more pink than red, really pretty, as you're going to see. And it's been here quite a long time. It was sown in April, planted in May, way back in the spring, been growing all summer without any cover, but I've sprayed it twice with Bacillus thuringiensis to kill any caterpillars. That's a harmless soil bacterial spray. And now you can see there's not many outer leaves. That's partly because I've been trimming them off as the season goes. The older leaves like this are not doing much for plant growth. They're starting to decay and everything. So it's a question of now trimming. Some of these are rotting. I've left this plant a bit too long, basically. So this is a good example of what happens if you don't harvest your cabbage in time. For a winter heart, sowing in April is a bit early. So I should have harvested this one. You see how these leaves are starting to rot on the outside. Now don't worry, this is not the end of the world. All being well, we can trim off a couple of these rotting leaves. And actually, well, there we are, that's it. We have a heart, just a tiny bit of decay there. Look at that, a beautiful pink heart Calibos cabbage. Rather like the cabbage heart that was starting to rot a bit, these carrots have been here probably a little bit longer than would be good if you want them all to be perfect looking. Because what I find with carrots is about 4 months from the date of sowing in summertime, they start to go off a bit, and I start to get slugs in there, you get imperfections. They carry on getting bigger. So you'll see there's a lovely harvest here of roots. So these were sown in late April, which is May, June, July, August. That's nearly 5 months ago. And we've earthed them up a bit with a bit of it's green waste compost on top here, municipal compost. And these are undug soil, so they're growing in the compost, going down a bit into the soil below. Actually slightly disproving my point here, they're looking almost perfect in fact. So that's really nice. Let's just see what this one's doing. Oh, that's looking pretty good as well. Well, here's an example though of an imperfection that does happen sometimes. And this is a carrot splitting. You see full of slugs and woodlice, that's interesting. That shows how pests do tend to home in on imperfect, damaged vegetables. One split, 6 really good ones. That's a lovely harvest of autumn carrots. This is to show you a variation on Brussels sprouts. Normal Brussels sprout here, dark green leaves. You can see the little sprout buttons starting to form at the bottom. Next to it is a relative. This is a plant called flower sprout, which has been crossbred Brussels with kale. Hence the pretty kale-like leaves with a bit of red colour. They're very ornamental. They're also really nice to eat. So you have, instead of Brussels sprouts, you have little florets, rosettes of kale, loose leaves, small tiny leaves of kale. Not ready yet. They get more developed as winter approaches, and they are really good to eat. Very winter hardy because they're not tight buttons, so they resist a lot of frost, more frost even than Brussels sprouts. And you can come out in winter and harvest these lovely little florets on the stem. Here I'm beside some beetroot, which are coming ready now in early autumn from a summer sowing. They weren't sown very long ago. They've only been 2.5 months since they were sown. Beetroot's a fast-growing vegetable, and they were planted after a harvest in June of calabrese and cabbage. So it's the second crop this year, no extra feed given, just the compost, original compost from last winter. And what I do is I multi-sow them in a module, so 4 or 5 seeds in a clump all together, planted as a clump, not thinned out, not singled. So you can see the red beetroot, for example, here, growing, in this case 5 together. And there's one noticeably bigger, that's this one here, which I'm going to twist out. If you twist them rather than pull them, that helps to break the root away from the clump without damaging, hopefully anyway. This one's quite hard to get out because it's underneath the others. Normally they're more on top, but yeah, it's coming. So there we are. So there's a harvested beetroot, and you can see this one's now hanging a bit, but basically I'll just push the compost up a bit, and the 4 smaller beetroot which are left there will grow on. And next to it I have sown at the same time some lovely golden beetroot. Now these also were sown 4 seeds in a clump, only 2 came up. Not brilliant seed, it has to be said, but got the same or similar principle, much bigger one, smaller one. Again, I'm going to twist out the bigger one, simpler this time because there's only 2. There we are. And again, lovely harvest. So actually we have 2 beetroots there. You can see grown pretty close together, 15-inch spacing, 40 centimetres. And you get an idea of how many wonderful vegetables you can harvest in a small area. Beetroot's one of my favourites for that because they grow so close and so quickly, and they taste so good. Bulb fennel, or Florence fennel, is an amazing vegetable for growing in the autumn, sowing in the summer. So here we have fennel of different maturities, which were sown at just slightly different dates. That's the youngest there, that's only 8 weeks old, sown 22nd of July. Not yet ready, that'll come in October. Here we have one sown 29th of June, so 13, 14 weeks old. Again, not quite ready, but not far off. And finally, I'll show you one sown early June, which is ready to pick now. So how do you tell when a bulb of fennel is ready? It's a very noticeable swelling, that's the first sign. If you look in detail, you can see, I'm going to just twist this one out now. This is one way to get them out of the ground, so I've pulled the whole root, the whole plant. If you look at the bottom leaves there, at the bottom of the base, you can see a slight discoloration along the edge. That's a sign that it's ready. And the elongation too, they tend not to stay obligingly fat for very long, so you want to watch out for that and get them before they get too long. Trim off the bottom. See the bit of slug damage, that's another sign it's ready. And there we have a beautiful bulb of fennel. Now I'm just trimming off the stems, the main stems, but there we have a lovely bulb of fennel sown 3 months ago. Courgettes are amazing plants because they keep producing all summer. These plants here were sown in April, planted here in May, started cropping in June, so that's 3 months ago, and they've produced a courgette every day or every other day ever since. Now at this stage of the season, towards the end of summer and early autumn, they're starting to get mildew on their older leaves, the white on top of the green. This is nothing to worry about. It's a natural feature of the season, and it's only on the older leaves. There are still plenty of lovely green leaves. These are the important ones doing the photosynthesizing work, which are making for courgettes. And then the question is, what stage do you harvest a courgette? If you don't harvest your courgettes, they just get bigger and bigger, and they do turn into marrows. They're the same thing, basically, same plants. So a courgette is a young marrow. It's your choice when to pick it. Personally, I like to pick them when the flower is just starting to die off, going brown on the end of the fruit. That for me is a signal that it's turning from courgette-like consistency and flavour to marrow. So I cut it. You could snap them off, but there's a risk of perhaps damaging the stem. And there we have a courgette of a certain age, good to eat. Down here, there's one of the same age actually, but on a slightly more vigorous plant. You see the flower is likewise just starting to die off. Take that off. For me, those are both courgettes. It's a word that applies to a fruit of many size. They're all good to eat. This is one plant of melon, Sweetheart, which I sowed late March, planted here in May. It's enjoyed being in the warmth of the polytunnel. Melons are heat-loving plants, so give them as much warmth as you possibly can. We've had a good summer here, lots of sunlight, so that's been great. And look at the result. This plant, there's actually one out of shot, but it has 6 wonderful, good-sized melons. And I'm going to harvest one now just to give you an idea. I'll harvest it and then actually cut it open. And I can't give you a tasting, I'm afraid, but the aroma is one clue. How do you tell when a melon's ripe? Do you see how this one is starting to change from being a slightly grey green to a more glowing yellow green? That's a very good clue. Then you get the scent, the lovely melon aroma. And another clue that they're ripe is you get a bit of cracking around the top of the fruit there, where it's joined to the stem. Notice also how this really heavy melon, it probably weighs 2 kilos, is hanging itself. It doesn't need a net or any kind of support. That's another myth. They look after themselves as long as the plant itself is well anchored over wires at the top of my tunnel. So here we go. I'm cutting it. I've been waiting many months for this moment. And there we have a gorgeous melon. And now, just to show you what it's like inside, these are Charente melons, which have a sweet orange flesh. Look at that. And here I am, just cutting a little bit out of this melon to see what it tastes like. This is always the moment of truth, you know. Smell is a good guide. It does smell nice. Wow. Yeah, I'm pleased to say, oh my word, I got that one right. It's like, that's so sweet. These are plants of Sungold variety of tomato, which are stunning for their sweet flavour and early ripening as well. So they were sown early March, planted here in May after the winter salads had finished, and I cleared and then put down compost on the surface, no cultivations at all. This soil has never been touched to disturb it in any way, just compost on top. And that, I find, is enough food to produce these wonderful tomatoes which keep going all summer without any feeding. These plants have not been fed. They've had no other fertilizer of any kind, nothing except the compost. And look at the result. Wonderful healthy growth still. We're now mid-September. They've been cropping for nearly 3 months, and lots of lovely orange sweet fruits, which these were last picked 5 days ago. So, you know, they're ripening at the rate of a couple a day at the moment, just from one plant. So you don't need many plants to give you lots of meals. And then, now that we're in mid-September, I'm reducing the watering a bit because I want the plant to concentrate on ripening the fruit it has and keep the harvest going for another 3 weeks until early October hereabouts. It gets pretty cold, dark, so they don't actually ripen very much after that. The sweetness goes out, and so therefore back in the middle of August I stop the plant. I pinch off all growing points, and it means that the plant puts all its energy into existing fruit and reaches the point where actually there's even all the green fruit have ripened in early October. Pull it out, plant salad for winter. For further information, do visit my website www.charlesdowding.co.uk. Also, I've published 6 books which cover different aspects of growing a wide range of vegetables. No dig method, the wonderful harvest.